Hey everybody, this is Jessica. Welcome to week 4 of our discussion. Today I'm going to take the stance of opposition. I'm going to oppose the fact that I do not believe that violence in media is a cause for, or a direct cause for desensitization in children and aggressive in children. The first article I'm going to look at was from our Art of Advocacy. Wow. Choices in week number 2. It's the article by Andrew Weaver, a meta-analytical review of selective exposure to and the enjoyment of media violence. Within the article, Weaver discusses his findings as he looked at a number of different case studies, a number of different surveys and experiments that were conducted by different people, not necessarily anything he had researched, but he actually did a study of everyone else. What he found were a few important factors. The first one he talked about that stood out to me was the uses and gratifications approach to media violence, in that children and adolescents will look at media violence as the forbidden fruit, especially with parents who are very protective. I know mine was. So they actually seek violence in media out because they're not allowed to have it, because it's restricted, because of ratings, because of age limitations. Weaver also talks about the fact that, people just view violence in media as means for entertainment. He goes on to talk about that it's not what's in media that influences aggressive behaviors, but it could be related to a lot of outside factors. One of those he mentions that had a strong correlation was those who were already prone to aggressive behavior certainly enjoyed violence in media more than those who did not have those pre-existing conditions. He went on to say, in a quote, if violent content was not attractive, there would be little economic incentive to include it. Basically what he's saying there is that violence sells, sex sells, we know all this, and it's for the sheer entertainment of it, not necessarily because somebody wants to go out and perform those violent acts on someone else. He talked about the fact that adolescents and children are sensation-seeking and aggressiveness. Those who wanted to seek sensation and aggressiveness was positively correlated with attraction and violence. The important thing I think he talked about at the very end was the fact that the study did not include a nonviolent condition, which I believe that they forgot a control group there. In order for it to be a successful study, you do need a control to compare off of, because who's to say that those in the control group who were not exposed to nonviolent conditions still had aggressive behavior. I want to go on to say that I believe that the findings were inconclusive, which is what Weaver also thought, but the reason I think they're inclusive is because correlation does not necessarily imply causation. Which means, for instance, just because there's a lot of homeless people in my area and the violence rate went up, that doesn't, there's a positive correlation there, but that does not imply that homeless people are the reason for violence. In the same instance, you can do violence in media. The second article I want to look at, I chose violent video games and movies causing violent behavior. And it was actually by Eugene Berenstein. He talked about the biggest fear was the exposure to games or visual media with violent content may turn ordinary children and adolescents into violent people in the real world. That was kind of how he based everything. He started off, but he made a very good point that the research just simply does not support this fear. He went on to say that if anything, much of this violence serves as a reminder of how not to behave. So in society, whenever we watch, media violence, we're reminded this is how we're not to behave. Once again, he kind of piggybacks off of Weaver, and he talks about the fact that, a lot of times we look at violence in media for entertainment purposes. He referred to one particular case study in 2004 led by Dr. Olson, where she focused on 1,254 7th and 8th graders and 500 parents in South Carolina and Pennsylvania. She looked at what they were playing in regards to video games, how much time they played each video game, and the relationship that it had to their current behavior. Some of the reasons that the children discovered that they were playing video games was either to cope with their own emotions, to keep up with their peers, because they enjoyed challenging situations. They wanted to create their own worlds and relieve their stress. They found that there was a positive correlation between playing video games and self-reported fights. However, the issue is that the small percentage of children this was true in had already shown pre-existing conditions for aggressive behavior. Therefore, their study was inconclusive. Once again, he goes on to state, Berenstein goes on to state the fact that there are correlations, and correlation does not imply causation. You cannot point directly to the violence in media. It could be other social factors.